So the agenda that we're going through today is we're going to talk about trends for 2024, upwards and downward trends, information needed for evaluation instruction and quotation before then. We're also going to go through specialist reports and clients' expectations versus reality. Then I'll be covering our lending appetite. So this is where I'm going to be talking to you about certain questions that you can ask your client so that when you come together with your referral, you've got the answers ready for us to consider potentially higher LTV than what's on our product cards. And then finally, we're going to finish off with some questions. So I do have some questions that were asked of some of you before the session. So we'll run through those first, and then we'll go through to the chat later on. So if I can do ask that everybody keep yourself on mute, just so that we can keep the background noise to an absolute minimum. I'm praying that my dog does not start shouting in the background, because she certainly has a habit of that. But let's get started. So, on to the key investment opportunities in 2024.
Hello.
So given what you're seeing both at VAS and at Together, what security types are presenting as key investment opportunities in 2024? So Stephen, I'm going to come to you first, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me on, Michelle. I think the three biggest things that we've seen in the last 12 months is definitely a rise in the sort of small HMOs and getting a lot more valuation instructions on that side, and semi-commercial properties. I think that's driven out of investors mainly wanting to drive higher returns out of properties, and obviously directly linked with interest rates increasing. So those are the two big things that we've seen a shift in our business. I think we've actually seen a big sort of drop off about residential development valuations. We're about 18% of our whole business, and now they're about 5%. So that's really dropped off. And I think that is obviously an area. I think obviously it depends what happens with which government we're going to get and policies. I think we've had 15 housing ministers in the last 11 years. So there's definitely something, I'm sure everyone will agree, that the government needs to do a lot to start rejuvenating and start kickstarting house building. So I think there's definitely going to be opportunities there. I think the increase in product material prices, I think that issue is now sort of definitely dissipated, and we're seeing less of that. So hopefully we'll see a rise in those kinds of property sectors.
Fabulous. Thank you for that, Stephen. And Dave, what's your thoughts on opportunities in 2024?
So we've seen quite a few development exit transactions come across our desk in the last few weeks. I think we've got an appetite for those, providing there's some criteria that we need to go through for those type of transactions. In particular, just understanding that the scheme complies with all the planning permissions, material planning conditions and building regs. If it's been funded elsewhere, obviously, we'd like to see the latest PMS report. And just understand really any sales evidence that people can provide to give us a comfort that there is a market and there is demand for those completed units. In addition, we're beginning to see some more student transactions, PBSA in particular, where it would appear that there's still under supply in the market, especially in the cities serving Russell Group universities. There has been some negative press recently about the financial stability of a number of universities within the UK. So we do bear that in mind when we look at location. But yeah, the student accommodation market still seems strong, and there still seems to be an undersupply. What we've also seen is a number of office acquisitions or refinances, in particular where PDR is going to be the exit. There's been a change in government legislation at the last budget around PDR and the size of units that can be converted. So again, it's a case of putting together a good pack that we can have a look at, understand the planning position and what you're actually going to deliver. Because it's important when you're doing office to residential, you consider the size of windows, you consider the areas that people are going to be walking around, how they fit into the building, what sort of view aspect that people are going to get from those particular units. So plans and drawings are absolutely critical on that type of transaction.
Yeah, definitely. And just on that point then, with regards to Together's perspective for bridging, so if you are looking to acquire a property pending development finance. We can also support with development finance, but the initial bridge, our product plans do say that we'll do a 12-month bridge. But just for your awareness, everybody on the call, we can consider longer than a 12-month bridge. I personally price transactions at 18-month, 24-month bridges. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with the BDM to discuss those cases, because as Dave has mentioned, we're certainly seeing more and more of those transactions in the office accommodation space with the intent to flip into residential. So I guess on the flip side, there continues to be securities that pose a higher risk in 2024. Together, we have a vast list of acceptable properties. And those that included on our unacceptable properties include assets such as garages, so petrol stations and golf courses. But having said that, I'm aware of cases that we have in fact supported customers with these types of securities. So Dave, could you please share some examples of applications that you've seen where Together have supported against securities that on paper we would say no to?
Yeah, we do have a list of unacceptable properties, but we do consider them. The key always is the background of the client. So what is their history? What is their track record in that particular operation? So on petrol stations, I've thought of three that we've done in the last 3 months. One of them was acquiring a derelict petrol station, but where it's been repurposed, particularly for electric vehicle recharging, and they were enhancing the food and beverage offering. So they had some pre-lets to Greggs and Burger King. So we were happy to fund the development of that. We also had a 20-year lease to a well-known operator, so that was a great deal for us. We refinanced a portfolio of petrol stations in the West Midlands. We lent 50% loan to value on that one. Again, it was where a lender wanted to exit that particular sector, and we were prepared to do it, given that we were taking on 5 of about 15 that they had. So that one's worked well since. And then in Scotland, we did another couple of petrol stations, again, where we did 50% loan to value to assist an established and well-known retailer in that sector. Other things that the properties that we say we don't lend on, chemical works. So this was a really interesting one in Scotland that came in. It was for an existing customer of ours who's got a really good track record with us, but they were buying a closed down chemical works, and it really was a play on how do they remediate it. So we got information around the demolition, we got information about the clearance, in particular around the scrap value of the metal that was in there. And as the works were going on, that scheme got zoned by the local planning authority for residential and commercial. So it was a win-win situation on that one. We had a cleared site with an exit in 12 months subject to planning. So yeah, just because we say we have unacceptable types, you must sort of put them to us, speak to BDMs or the underwriters, and we can explain if it's something that we have got interest in. Don't just send it somewhere. Please send it through to us for consideration.
Yeah, definitely. And we've certainly seen a growing level of the more quirkier properties, because what other lenders may seem as a higher risk and not lend against them is something that we continue to support. I'll be talking about pubs later on, but certainly pubs is an area that we seem to do an awful lot of because of the flexible lending criteria that we can consider with those. Fabulous. So given those opportunities there that we've just discussed, Stephen, could you please share some guidance on information that is vital when requesting a valuation quote and inspection to enable an accurate and speedy report from the surveyor?
Yeah, I think for us, it's just picking the right valuer, and the valuer having the right amount of information in order to quote properly. Unbelievably, 35% of all the quotes we get through our business, we've got a dedicated quotes team. The information's incorrect that's given to us, so we try and pre-qualify as much as possible at the start to reduce sort of any friction and issues down the line. we get information from like EPC is really good. It always gives a description of what the property is. Rateable value that gives a description about the property as well. But what we're after basically is property description, floor areas if you've got them, condition really helpful, like tenancies. I think planning use is a big one. I think the market value, the valuer has to value what's in front of them and what the planning is. So even if the loan's only for say purchase of the property, but it's got permission for redevelopment, that the valuer needs to value it on the residual method that it's got planning for. So I think that's really useful. And like I say, it just doing that. I mean, you don't have to have absolutely everything there. It's the valuer's job to go off and get leases and ASTs and things like that. If you can give it to them, it helps speed the process up and it's really useful. But like I say, it's just we want to, at VAS, we want to make sure we're getting the right valuers and the right advice. And the last thing we want to do is have to stop the process. We've instructed like a pure residential valuer and it's a semi-commercial, for example. The last thing we want is to have an abortive fee, find a new valuer. We want to pick the firm that can go do the job, like I say, and reduce as much friction as possible so we can get the report back together at the times that we've told them and the brokers.
Yeah, I mean, 35%, that's quite a high percentage, isn't it? And I know we talked because Tanya and I came up to visit your team up in Middlesbrough, and you'd mentioned about that one quotation inquiry that you had when the surveyor went out to inspect the property. It turned out that they had an MOT garage in the back garden, but they instructed it on the basis of a residential valuation.
Yeah.
And these things, whilst we can support certainly it together where it's mixed use, you certainly need to make sure that the information that you're providing the surveyor is as accurate as possible, as much information as possible, because it could affect how we look and assess that case from an LTV perspective, but also the information that's needed on the report back from the surveyor and from VAS. So thank you for sharing those hints with the team there. So on occasion, the valuation estimates that we're given, that we're presented with, differ from the actual valuations that's reported by the surveyor. So Dave, Stephen, could you please share some hints and tips on what customers could do in advance of the valuation instruction to understand a more realistic valuation and potentially prevent any loss of costs?
Yeah, it's interesting. We record the data about estimated value and actual value across the entire business. So over 12 months ago, we ran at an average of 8%, but it's now roughly around 12.5% of the disparity across everything. We've done over 20,000 valuations in the last 12 months. So that's the average across all of it. I know it's obviously difficult for brokers because the estimated values, the perception of the customer of what they think the property is worth. There are some areas you could go to have a look at. I mean, the comps databases that most valuers use. You've got like property data is really, really good on residential properties. I think it's quite a cheap subscription. It gives you quite a good, useful like analysis of the area, like rate per square foot. So you could do some pre-qualifying quite easily off that. Commercial's a bit harder. You got Radius and CoStar. They are expensive subscriptions, but that's generally where valuers get all the commercial comparable evidence from. You've got the EI group. Again, that's all the auction data that's sold across the whole country. That is really, really helpful. I think that's quite a cheap subscription a year as well. So I encourage anyone to get that because I think that's really useful, that and property data. And obviously land reg, I think we'll probably talk about it later about like actual sales price of the property and purchase price. But I think land registry and if it's sold recently for £1 million and the customer thinks it's worth 1.4, it's just try and get a good reason for why they think it's worth more and just to get an understanding and a background really. So so obviously the broker doesn't want to waste time on cases where it's potentially not going to go anywhere. So that little pre-qualification of work at the start alongside the information could be quite helpful.
Yeah, again, that comparable is key really, especially when the valuer goes out or if there's a challenge to the numbers in due course. I think having that sort of evidence is critical, and the valuer will assess it based on the information that's provided. So if you've got please provide it.
Yeah, definitely. And also, when you've done that comparable evidence and what, from your perspective, if it looks like what the customer is saying is a bit optimistic, Also see, have they got any other securities in the background? Because that's another thing that we can consider is doing cross-charging, because we can cross-charge to enable up to 100% of borrowing where needed. So that's just another thing back up just in case when it gets to the surveyor, there is something that they haven't told you about untoward about the property that is going to affect the valuations. If you already know that there's something else that we can throw into the mix to help save the deal, then we can get cracking with that as soon as possible. But connected to that, I guess, even if a customer does contest the surveyor's valuation in their report, what's the best course of action for them to challenge this?
Yeah, we've got a contest form that we've sort of devised over time that we passed it together to pass to the customer. And if the customer's knows about evidence that's sold nearby that the value is not picked up on, then we encourage them to give us all the details possible, and then we'll send that on to the valuer and ask them to review it and then come back. And we found that's the quickest way to speed up, because obviously time is invariably of the essence with these things.
Yeah.
So try and get a response as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Great, thank you for that. Then talking about specialist reports, we've had instances where the surveyor has requested for a specialist report, such as a structural engineer's report or a damp and timber report. However, in some scenarios, we have customers that are still pressing to progress to completion without this. Dave, what are your thoughts on the customer's benefits of carrying out these specialist reports before completing if it is a purchase transaction?
I mean, if I was buying a property and a valuer had picked up there was an issue with the building or the structure, for my own benefit, I would ask for a surveyor's report to be done. And I think most purchasers would feel the same, because you just don't know what you're buying. A valuer is not a building surveyor, just to be clear. So they will go out and they will give an opinion on value, but they will also mention to us if they see anything of note. So if there's any cracking like subsidence or it's got cladding on the outside, they will make us aware of it. So we, as a responsible lender, have to check out what implications that could have either for now or in the future. Because at some stage, that client will be selling that property. So another purchaser in due course might say, well, have you had a building survey done? So to me, get it done as soon as you can. They do help us in considering the loans. They do help sort of understanding any defects in that property or any work that needs to be done to remediate it. Those have to be costed out, and all that sort of brings it together. We do need those reports. It's really important. So anything to do with the building survey, man reports, things like that, they all need to be made up. We need to be made aware of any issues.
Yeah.
I think on the purchase as well, in particular, it protects the purchaser as well. So if it might be something that they've not picked up on, to get that looked at and reviewed in advance of them buying it, because it might affect what they'd be willing to pay for it.
Yeah, and it's it's potential to discuss the agreed purchase price if it transpires following structural engineer's report that works are required. Because certainly if there's potential evidence of subsidence, it is important to investigate that further and understand what the costs are involved, and whether or not the customer has got the funds and the budget to be able to remediate that. So yeah, agree. It's really important to make sure those specialist reports are in. So if the surveyor is specifying on the report it's needed, it is needed for us as well, for us to be able to progress to completion. But it doesn't mean that if there is a problem that we can't find a solution. If there is a problem, it's just understanding what the customer's plans are, and what the extent of the issue and what works really needs to be done on something like that. So I'm just going to talk through about our lending appetite. And the reason why I say this is because when you look at our product plans, there's certain properties on there. I mentioned pubs earlier, and I say that because the LTV that shows on our product plans said that we'll only consider up to 50% loan to value on a pub. Same goes for bed and breakfast. The product guide says it will only go up to 50% of that. And actually, what is required is understanding that transaction in more detail as to whether or not we can push that out. Because to give you some examples, depending on a pub, where the location is, what the footfall is into the pub, and also what their income is like. If they've got strong trading books, then actually we might look to offer a greater LTV than that 50%. In fact, I've done certain purchase transactions myself. I've supported brokers with it's 65%. So that gives you an idea. The plan, you might just look at the plan and think it's 50, but actually we are considering certain securities higher than that. Equally for a bed and breakfast, you know, if the customer's got a lot of experience in the bed and breakfast, decent income, good location, again, we will consider a higher LTV. I've even done bed and breakfast on a purchase between 65 and 70%. So certainly worth reviewing that case further to see where we're at. To give you an indication, I know we're talking about securities that on paper that we don't do, but David mentioned earlier that actually, you know, we spoke about a petrol station. We can do these transactions, and another one of them on there is a casino. So casinos on a list of things that we don't do. However, we can consider it if it's a chain or with a strong lease in place, and we've actually considered those at 50%. So obviously the risk appetite is low because we're at that 50% mark, but 50% we can consider these, as opposed to what initially you may think we don't support those types of transactions. A recent change that we've made it together, hopefully some of you have had the news from your BDMs, but up until fairly recently, any residential security that had a restricted use for holiday let use only, we were pricing these and undertaking criteria through our commercial product range. However, 2 weeks ago, when I was selling myself on holiday, we actually changed that criteria back to how we used to have it. So in case you haven't had the fantastic news, we are actually treating these, as long as it's a residential house, so it's not a holiday park, as long as it's a residential house, and could theoretically, the restriction that's on there for holiday let could be removed. We're happy to assess these back on buy to let pricing. And with that, it means that we can consider up to 75%, again, subject to the asset type. So there's positive move, and that's off the back of feedback. So I went and saw a broker, and we were talking about types of cases that were being placed elsewhere because of our lending criteria. And it's through your feedback that we're able to make those changes. I spent some time with our telephony team yesterday and looking through some of their inquiries that they're getting from yourselves. And I see a lot of inquiries where brokers are mentioning that there's commercial security either side of the security or in close proximity. But from Together's stance, we are perfectly happy with commercial securities being in close proximity of a residential, whether that's a regulated transaction or an unregulated transaction. So there's actually no need to ask us about those types of inquiries, because we are happy to proceed with them. Regarding graded, yep, sorry.
I just add in about specialist trading properties. So assets like public houses or hotels or care homes. The provision of management and audited information is really important, because that gives the valuer a starting point as to what sort of maintainable profit that building is going to be able to deliver. And that then drives the methodology they use, that drives then a yield and then a valuation. So any accounting information that is available for any specialist trading properties should be provided to the valuer.
Yeah, definitely. And just to go through now then some questions to consider. Certainly these are questions that we'll be asking you if you come to a member of the team with in particular complex security types or commercial securities where you're looking for a slightly higher LTV. These are things to be asking. So you're right, it is around the accounts, the trading accounts of the business. That's a key question to ask for us to understand what the strength is of the past income but future income for that security. What leases are in place? So Dave, you mentioned earlier about the petrol station, but it's got Greggs and there was a Burger King there. So because there's these strong brands connected to that, that's another reason for us to show that there's strong leases in place, and that's a security that clearly we're going to have appetite to support with. is the property in a good location? So is there positive footfall, say, for example, if it is a public house, or if you're looking at holiday lets, we do an awful lot of holiday lets. I mentioned that criteria change that we've had with pricing, but is it a great location for the holiday let? Because again, that could then affect the estimated holiday let income estimates that they get from a local letting agent to support with the affordability for our side. So that's a key one to have a look at, is it in a good location? What are the features? If it's a pub, what other features do they have? So is there a restaurant, outdoor entertaining space? So where it may not have potentially have strong trading business to date, you could have somebody that's got significant experience that's taken over said pub, can give us a business plan, but actually has got a significant experienced team in place to run the likes of a restaurant that would really add value to that property for us to consider a higher LTV. And key, what experience does the customer have? So in the past, I've had inquiries where I like to call them pipe dreams, where a customer is looking to do something for the very first time with no background income. It makes it very difficult for us to get comfortable on the positive nature of that transaction as to whether or not it's going to go into default. But we have recently supported a customer who's a vet and is buying into a vet's practice. So they've been working in its vet's practice for years, but they had the opportunity to purchase into the vet's practice. And because of their experience, not just with LTVs, but TSDI, our total secured to debt income ratio that we assess for commercial trading businesses, typically on our product plans, it will say 50%. However, for this particular inquiry, we pushed that to 60% because actually the level of experience, looking at the income that the vet's practice had up until that point and the projections income for the particular vet's practice, this got us comfortable with looking at the higher TSDI than theoretically what our product plans say. So experience is really key to understand that. That said, we can look at cases where the customer doesn't necessarily have experience, but they are retaining an experienced team. Say, for example, if they're purchasing into a hotel business, if the general manager and the staff, everything remains the same, then that gets us a bit more comfortable than somebody just buying something with complete brand new, going into a hotel business with no experience. I know certainly I wouldn't be able to run a hotel. But these are key questions to be asking. In addition to, if you're looking at a bridge, we can look at slightly higher LTVs than what we do on our term finance for bridging, as long as we've got a strong exit strategy. So say, for example, if they're looking at a bridge because they need to move at pace, but they've got an exit already lined up, offer on the table with perhaps a high street lender that they've been banking with for many, many years, then that gives us comfort for us to look at a slightly higher LTV than perhaps what we would do on a term transaction. So I know with bridging, we always ask what is the exit strategy, but this is really important when you're looking at some of these complex property types so that we're comfortable. And that includes land. What is the exit strategy? Was looking at one fairly recently where the exit was sale on a plot of land. They were going to sell the plots off prior to development. However, there was a condition in the planning agreement that the plots needed to be retained by the purchaser for 5 years. So the exit strategy was never going to work on that transaction. And actually, it's more of a refinance structure that they should have been looking into. So I know we talked about planning beforehand. That is so key. That's the first thing. If somebody's talking to you about a land transaction or a development transaction, have a look at the planning website. What has actually been agreed? Is the planning still valid? So that's a key thing to consider. Dave, anything else that you'd like to add on to that?
No, just on particularly on that land one you were talking about, is making sure there's a residual appraisal, so we can understand where the valuation of the land as is has come from. How secure are those build costs? So where have they got those from? Is it a case of they've actually got a contractor lined up, or have they just been on the BCIS website to get a breakdown on indication? The planning consent, as I say, is really key. as is the 106 and the community infrastructure levy.
Yeah.
We have had a number of cases recently, and it's a little bit of a warning where a developer hasn't signed a 106, and that means the planning hasn't been enacted, or the planning decision notice hasn't been issued. So we ask that the 106 is signed expeditiously on any deal, so that planning permission notice has been issued, and then a JR period kicks in. What we don't want to do is find out we're 3 years down the line, the 106 hasn't been signed, and the local plan could have changed, which means that instead of residential on that site, the council might now want to put commercial retail offices on there. So it's really key that planning permission is secured as quickly as possible. Yeah, and just on trading properties, I think it's worthwhile just sort of saying that what we lend against primarily is the VP value on a closed down basis. So what we ask for is the valuer will sort of come up with a market value of that property, but then we ask for a valuation assuming that the trade has ceased, there's no trading records, licenses have been lost, and that all fixtures and fittings have been removed. So it's a little bit like a bricks and mortars valuation of that property. I think that's key that's brought out, that's the figure we tend to lend against on trading properties.
Yeah. Fabulous. Thank you for that, Dave. And that's something that we do, in fact, ask in the sales team when you present us with the valuation, particularly with the likes of HMOs as well. We often see an investment valuation, but it is the vacant possession basis. So the bricks and mortar, which is how we assess the valuation here Together, which leads us nicely into the question section, because I have some asked broker questions. As I said, these are ones that were submitted before we started this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. So I'm just going to go through these first of all, and then I'm going to go through to the chat. So if you haven't asked a question yet and there's something burning in your mind about anything to do with valuations, please do raise it in the chat box, and then we'll get through to it after we've gone through these pre-asked questions. So the first one, question one. Why do Together need the rely upon after 3 months? Some lenders have a 6-month validity on valuations, and when a valuer wants to do a new report 4 months after the original val, this causes some challenges when other lenders don't need this. So that's probably one for you, Dave, on that question.
And this is where we get the most of our queries, other than valuation reviews, valuation rely-ons. It's a credit policy decision that Together has put in place, that a valuation we can rely on for 3 months from the valuation date. That's a credit policy decision that they've taken, and we get asked lots of questions about why it's 3 months. I think the credit risk board just want to make sure that when we're lending against a particular property, that valuation is as close to the valuation date as possible. We want to make sure that valuation is robust, that there's nothing happening in the market that could affect it. So 3 months was the timeline that was set. We changed the process slightly in terms of valuation rely-ons about 3-4 months ago, where we're asking the valuer to simply sign a letter to say that the valuation number still can be relied upon, assuming there's been no changes to the market, no changes to the property. And whilst there was a little bit of noise to begin with, I think, Stephen, the response now is pretty settled, and most valuers understand what we're asking for and are happy to provide the letters.
Yeah. I think so, and I think it's just from my point of view, it's very common across the market, the 3-month rule, and I think it's totally fair for Together and any lender just to want to just check with the valuer whether the value's changed from that point of time 3 months ago. I mean, it's pretty rare you get it for some vanilla properties like residential. Generally, valuers are just like, yeah, it's the same, but the more bespoke and unique and unusual properties, sometimes they do want to have a look just to get comfortable, just whether that's just to see if anything else is sold nearby, or I mean, the worst case scenario is you want to go and inspect it and see it again. It doesn't happen very often, but it does. But there's generally a reason why they'll want to. Most valuers want to work with Together and the client, and they want they don't want to have to cause any issues. But if it's in their professional opinion, they'd like a little bit of a look, then they do. But like I say, we're there to support that process.
Yeah. And I think kind of connected to this, what's key for us as well is to work together from the sales, underwriting and the broker perspective to try and do what we can at the forefront to get those cases moving through to legal instruction as quickly as possible to prevent any potential delays that side. Because what's really key is for us to try and complete as many cases as we can before that 3-month window closes. But we do take on higher risk transactions, high risk securities, which is why we do need that added comfort of understanding really what the latest valuation figure is, hence the need for the 3 months. So question 2. Could you please share the rationale on the differing valuation figures? So open market value, 180-day and 90-day, and why together use the lower figure when there is more than a 10 or 15% difference. So just to bring this to life on the product plans, it does say for any residential security, if there's more than a 10% difference between the open market value and the 90-day, to refer this in. And for any commercial security, if there's more than a 15% difference between the 180-day and the 90-day, to refer this in. But Dave, why is there a difference, and what have you seen when there has been some variance between the 10 and 15%?
Yeah, again, it's a case of refer it in. It depends really what the asset is. If it's a standard residential, I'm sure the underwriters, when they look at it, will look at the market. If it's a standard 2 up, 2 down, I'm sure we can take a view on that. But where it's a specialist product, specialist property, we tend to look at the 180-day ordinarily. If there is a difference, we will review it. We're not going to say we lend off it all the time, but we just want to make sure that whenever we lend, that if we lend money on a Monday, that we can get the money back on a Friday. That's the way that we look at all our transactions. So is there anything about that property which means that you couldn't get your money back within a reasonable time frame? So the criteria is that we ask for assuming a 180-day in which to exchange contracts. So you normally find on a commercial property there's a 5 to 10% differential. On a 90-day it might be 15 to 20. But we primarily lend off that 180-day, and if we're at a comfortable level at that, we will stick to that. But if you refer it to us, yeah, providing there's nothing about the property that means it's going to be difficult to sell, we tend to lend off the market value or the 180-day.
I think, and again, I'd say it's common across the market. The lenders ask for different bases of valuation, and that's been like that for many years. And I'd echo what Dave said. I think like if it's a vanilla property, less risky, there's more data there. I think we do see some some big swings in the 180 and 90 on like the more bespoke properties. Like I remember seeing an empty, really large hotel in the outskirts, in the middle of nowhere in Scotland, and it was a really big differentiator. But I think it's the likelihood of selling that property that you got those things don't transact every day, so the level of uncertainty is higher. You've got less comparable evidence to back it off, so the level of uncertainty is higher. So you've got like the property type, like Dave says, but also like you might get things like shopping centres like multi-let. I mean, the chances of selling them, even doing the due diligence in 3 months, unlikely. So like Dave said, it's making a sort of a common sense approach to which basis you're going to lend off, and understanding that certain properties just can't be sold in that short period of time. It's a complex, like I'll happily take any questions like offline about these, because the basis of valuation is the standard I use is like a retail shop let for 10 grand could have a market valuing the leases at 100,000, but you come out of a VP 90-day at 70 grand. So the value is valuing the same thing, but on a different basis. The level swings 30%. So it's understanding the basis is really important.
Thank you both. And also, whilst if you are in a situation where we do have to lend against the 90-day, please bear in mind that we can still consider potentially a slightly higher LTV than what we would have done, say, if it was on the 180 day. So say, for example, if our lending criteria states that we can do 60% of the 180 day, but it transpires actually there's too much of a differentiation between the 180 and 90, please also have the discussion with us, because we may look at doing slightly higher than that 60%. It could be 65, 70 in some scenarios. But I just encourage you. I know we keep talking about it, but I just encourage you to refer these through to us. So question 3. What are the impacts of spray foam insulation? Funnily, we get asked this quite a bit, which is quite surprising. But what are the impacts of spray foam insulation, and how can this affect the valuation?
I think, I mean, I think it being installed properly, having full documentation and warranty is important. I think you do read cases where it's not being installed properly, and it can lead to damp, can lead to issues. And then that affects the saleability essentially. So it's important that full documentation and warranty is in place, and then it gives together the confidence and to move forward. Don't know, Dave.
We talked before about specialist reports. Again, if I was buying a house and it had spray foam insulation, I'd want to make sure that it'd been installed correctly by a reputable contractor. And if it is, there's normally a warranty in place. If it's done by I call a cowboy, well, there's potentially damp issues that could happen over the next few years and ends up with rotting timbers, which means the roof has to be replaced. So not only does it affect you, but it'll also affect the ongoing saleability of that property as well in the future. So it's really important that you get those reports undertaken and you understand what you're actually buying.
Yeah, definitely. Reputable warranty in place, send that through to us, and then we'll be more than likely happy to proceed with that transaction. So question 4, this is something that does come up very often, is why do surveyors want to know about a property sales history? So Stephen, I know that you mentioned earlier we're going to talk about that a bit later. So why do they want to know about a sales history of a property?
I think, well, first of all, commonly it's asked for in the together as in many lenders valuation instruction letter. It's asked for by the lender that they want to know that. So I think that's the first point of why they'd want to know. But I think it's the best form of evidence. I think understanding how long it's been on the market, how many bidders there were, how soon they sold it. I think that really helps the valuer to I guess that removes the level of uncertainties. But they don't just take that in isolation. I know there's different reasons for purchase and the transaction, but they also take that into account with all the comparable properties that have sold nearby as well. But understanding that sales history, I'd say, it is important. And like I say, it's important for a broker to understand that. My example before, like if it's sold, I think I saw one pop up in the comments that I know that it does lag behind. The land reg does lag behind, so it's difficult to find this information out. Bidding history you might not get. You might get it on auction. Traditionally, you could get the history of what happened in the bidding process, but it's virtual now, so it's not, people aren't even in the room, so it is hard to come by. But if your customers just bought it for £1 million and it was an open market transaction, like the true definition of market value, it was arm's length, properly marketed for a reasonable period of time, and the customer thinks it's worth more, just get under the skin of it to find out, because the question will ask, but if you've got a really good explanation at the start, again, that's really helpful for the valuer going forward.
Yeah. And as you say, if something, as long as it makes sense, we can look at considering against the uplifted value. But if, say, for example, I know that what we see quite a bit is clients perhaps who bought something at an undervalue, say a family transaction, where mum or dad have sold something to son for £100,000 less than what it's actually worth. And then they're then expecting to leverage the equity out of that pretty much within the first 6 months. And understandably, for us, there's no commitment from the customer. If it all goes wrong, they don't really lose anything. If they borrow the full LTV as we would with a normal transaction. So definitely worth where you can trying to investigate what the original purchase price was if it's been a recent transaction. How local, Stephen, does a surveyor need to be to a property to carry out the valuation inspection?
Yeah, I think that we work off around 30 miles, and from the valuer's nearest office to the property. But having local market knowledge, understanding the area, they've got the best knowledge of the supply, the demand in the areas, and developments nearby that could affect the property. How well does it sit into its local environment? So most properties having local expertise is really critical in being able to provide best advice to together and in their lending decisions. There is some like national markets, so generally a lot of the time it's a local purchaser, a local investor, and then the agents locally will know who they are and the valuers. But I think like the shopping centre market, like big top end student accommodation, for example, that's a national market. So these national JLLs got a shopping centre team. Most of the big multinationals that are on our panel, they'll all have got these specialisms in there, and they've got sales teams that sell these assets. So like JLL have got a shopping centre team that sell them. So the valuers and the investment teams work hand in hand together. So they know who are the individuals. You get like stately homes, you get something with many acres, 50,000 square foot. It's a bit of an exaggeration, probably not many 50,000 square foot house, but yeah, a large house in the middle of nowhere where there's only like 5 to 10 people in the whole country who could buy them. So like you pick the valuers like Strunt Parker, for example, that those are the kind of firms who totally understand that market and they understand who the people purchasing them. So 90% of everything we do is probably local market, local valuers, but there is that need for the national players to give advice.
Yeah.
Stephen, if you could update your system with more sort of drop-down options as to the type of property, so we can get a better valuer involved, is that
so we've basically like doubled the amount of categories we've got available now in terms of the sector. So we cover absolutely everything now. We did anyway, but I think we've just gone further in. We've got every national firm on our panel now, bar probably one or two. And like I say, they've got all these specialist teams. We've been able to build them specialist teams within inside the software so we can target the right valuers. And also we've relooked at the HMO, small HMO, who can do that on the panel. So yeah, we've really, I think if you've got access to our portal and you go down on the drop downs, you'll be able to see, especially in that specialist column, we've got a lot more, being a lot more explicit now, I'd say, in being able to pick the correct sectors.
Okay, right.
Great enhancement to technology there, Stephen. So we've got two more questions and then we'll go through to the chat. So why is a cash valuation returned? And how is this calculated? And what does this mean for the customer?
I think there's no in the RICS. There's no such thing as a cash value. Essentially, what everything's got a market value, but what cash value means is the valuer doesn't deem that property as good loan security, essentially. And what they're saying is someone's more likely going to have to buy that with cash. I think that's all that means. So, if you the way it should be done properly, in my opinion, is like give a market value, but when it ticks in the loan security suitability box, you tick no. But I think the market does use, I think the word bricks and mortar, I think that you mentioned before, Michelle, that definition is definitely sort of sliding out of our industry now as it's becoming more sophisticated. But cash value is there and people do understand what a cash value is, but it's simply that someone buying with cash because the valuer doesn't assume that they could get a loan against it, essentially.
And I'm sure you're all aware, but at Together we can still lend against properties that have just got the cash value, whether that's again a regulated or an unregulated transaction. We do have solutions where we're still happy to support if just a cash valuation is returned. I'll come to you, Dave, for this final question for the questions. Why is a long form valuation needed for commercial properties when a short form valuation is much cheaper for residential securities?
I think it's just because of the nature of what the asset we're being asked to lend against. So if it's an industrial building, you want a detailed description of the location, what it involves, how it was built, the site area, ground conditions. There's lots and lots of extra questions that we as a lender need to understand and understand the risks of that transaction by asking for a long form, which just aren't on a short form valuation report. They are sort of really good pieces of information, and when we're asked to review them, we read them from back to front front to back page, and pick out all the points in there that we need to be aware of to understand what that asset is like and what the risks are to the transaction that we're asked to consider. So we need that information.
Commercial development specialist properties, they're more complex than residential. So it's as simple as the valuer needs to write more planning information, more valuation methodology, etc. And you can't fit that on the short form. So the short form's definitely got a place for. You can do light refurbs on there. You can do like obviously vanilla buy-to-lets, things like that, small HMOs. But when the property becomes more complex, you just need to be able to do it. I think we like at VAS, we've got access to 3 or 4 good residential only valuation practices. They do a lot of their work through Quest, and that short form's built into Quest. So we've got access to all of that. And that's why, going back to the very first question or second question about getting information right, like if we can use one of these valuers, it's a straightforward resi and it doesn't have a huge amount of refurbishment works, we can send it to those surveyors. But if we send them a residential and it's completely stripped back to the brick wall, they're the wrong firm to do it, and you need more. Like I say, that probably wouldn't fall in line with, say, a development valuation. So you need to put more information into the report, so it's longer essentially.
Thank you both. So onto the live questions then that we've had. Stephen, why is a HMO valued differently? Surely a house is worth what someone will pay for it rather than the rental income on its current use.
Yeah, I'd say HMOs are the greyest area in valuation, and I think valuers do struggle to value them. I'll be honest. We work hard with them. I think you've got to take a step back and think about what the average person would do. Like, would they buy that terraced house there that's got a bedroom in the lounge and, value it on the investment method and pay 20-30% premium over the house they could buy next door, and then literally just do the same? I mean, that's the crudest possible example. Or they bought the terraced house and they spent 30 grand on it, and what would the average person do? So I think if you get into the C4 space, planning space, it's an Article 4 directive area, so it's harder to get those planning uses, or it's sui generis and this thing's a purpose-built block. So it depends where it falls on that line. But if a property is fully fitted out as a HMO, it's all en suite, it's got the licenses, etc., like there is a case to do the investment approach. But like I say, you just the valuer needs to take a step back and just look what it is and what will the average person do and buy it. There's definitely a lack of what we find is a lack of sales evidence to support it as well. So these things aren't transacting, so it's quite difficult. What they're doing is they're buying them and converting them and then using them as a HMOs. So it's hard for valuers to actually get the transactional evidence from the yields. So yeah, we could have a whole session on HMOs. Not saying I want to do it, but I happily do it. It is really complex.
Have you committed to that one for next time?
We've done a video on Knowledge Hub with what we've got on our website, to a little plug there. But we do explain it in detail, the differences between the different stages of the HMOs, which I think I'd encourage anyone in that space who want to learn more to listen to that.
Yeah, fantastic mini videos on your site. So good plug there, Stephen, because certainly lots of useful information there for everybody to go ahead and look at. Kit's mentioned about another lender who actually said that they needed to remove the spray foam insulation, and it cost the client a whopping £7 grand to have this done. Yes, Kit, I'm sorry to say, we could have lent it there as long as there was a reputable installer with a warranty in place. We could have considered that transaction. So next time, think of together for those deals. So Ishba's asked about development for high-end private members club. Dave?
Yes. Yep, we will lend against the 180-day vacant possession value of that property. And we have done.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I know a member of my team has done a few of those. She seems to have a habit of getting those inquiries.
Likewise, with an owner-occupied nightclub, again, yes, we will lend nightclubs with owner occupation. Again, it's a case of what's that property worth if it's closed down. It's got its planning, but it's closed down. That building is there for that particular purpose, and we will lend off what the valuer says against that 180-day vacant possession value.
Thank you. So I know, Stephen, you mentioned about the differences between the valuations, and Jeff has asked, why is the 90-day value coming more than 10% below recently?
Again, it'd be sector driven. So whatever that property is that's being valued, if it's more unusual, bespoke, they don't sell every day. The valuer's got more uncertainty about being able to get a buyer to exchange or complete in the 90 days. Then that the percentage would be wider. But to get to these discounts, it's very subjective from the valuer's point of view, and it's difficult. So that they work towards the market value first, and they duck backwards from there. So if you came back and said, look, I know something around the corner that sold, and it sold in 90 days, 6 months or whatever, and that counteracts it, then I'm sure the buyer would be open to hearing it, because it is subjective and it is really difficult for them.
Yeah, and we just following on to the next question there, we've got a question about delays. I know we talked about looking at the original purchase price with regards to any delays with registering the title. However, if, for example, you're asking about speed at which loans are funding, if it's a case that somebody has purchased something recent and land registry has not yet been updated, yes, we can still support. However, the customer's solicitor will need to act on that transaction to provide us with an undertaking to confirm that they will register our charge. So it doesn't necessarily impact the speed for which we can fund, but it does need to involve the client solicitor to do that additional work there for us. So the speed is therefore with the client solicitor, but we can act with these just as quickly as we do normal transactions from our side. Luke's asking about the chemical plant. Was the land an acquisition to acquire planning, or was it actual development loan with planning in place prior to funding?
So it was an acquisition. What we did do, though, was a lot of due diligence around the planning status of that particular property. We have external planning advisors that we talked through the deal, or the client did as well, to see what the likelihood of success of getting a planning consent on there was. And it was, when we first did it, going to be all industrial. So there's going to be knocking down buildings, cleaning up sites. We had lots of reports about the contamination that was on there. And then through the process, the council then approached and said, well, can we do residential on there as well? We'd like a mixed use scheme. So it was a fantastic transaction for us. The gearing was only 50%. And we lent without any hope value. It was based on industrial land, effectively. And we lent towards that and towards the actual demolition and cleanup costs, but got money back in as and when some of the scrap was sold. So it was quite a detailed due diligence that we undertook on that one, but well worth it for the client and for us.
Yeah, fantastic solution that was delivered on that one. Kate, regarding your question on longer term bridges, correct that together any longer than 12 months needs to be serviced? No. So what you will need to do is just reach out to your BDM to just make us aware as to what the reason is for anything longer, because we can look at retained for longer than 12 months, but we will look at that on a case-by-case basis. So again, depending on the asset type, the pricing may differ. But yes, we can certainly look at them on a retained basis. We just need to understand the reason as to why they're looking for longer than 12 months. But in some scenarios, it certainly makes sense. I've done one fairly recently where the purpose was because of potential delays with planning, they wanted that security of having a slightly longer bridge. It makes sense. So yes, we can certainly do those.